I was in Iceland last semester, and they talked about Lugaveder days, where it's like you look out and it's like sunny, and you think for a second it's going to be a great day, and then you remember it's like freezing cold outside. I just feel like that's how it's been for like the past 2 years. So happy Lugaveder morning. So I'm really excited to have our second formal Digital Humanities Workshop that is sponsored by the Digital Humanities Initiative. And just as a reminder, the Digital Humanities Initiative is a collaboration between the Institute for the Humanities and the University Library, and we received a grant from the University of Illinois President's Office to establish this initiative on campus this year. And those funds have helped us have our fall workshop. They have supported this workshop, and then we will be having our big Digital Humanities Conference in April, which will be April 29th and 30th. Registration is open for that. So if you have any questions about the conference, at some point today, feel free to ask me any questions, and everything for that is on the DHI site. So before I talk a little bit about our wonderful workshop leaders, Brian's going to mention our really exciting Digital Scholarship Hub that we've recently opened here in the library.
So, hi, I'm Brian Atkinson, Digital Scholarship Research Coordinator. I know many of you. So as we're talking about digital scholarship and tools and methods and all of this, for those of you who aren't acquainted with it, we actually have 2 spaces here in the UIC Richard J. Daley Library, one on the first floor and one on the second floor, specifically designed to support digital humanities and digital scholarship. And that's just a branch out of kind of a larger picture that includes digital publishing and online presence as well, and the online archives, things of that nature. But downstairs, for lack of a better term, sort of a prototyping and fabrication space, and then upstairs, visualization, 3D, augmented reality, text mining, GIS, things of that nature. So it's all available here, and I get to learn how to do it even better. We've only been open for like a month, and it's only been in the work for less than a year, 6 months, 8 months. I think we've kind of made huge strides to get to where we are, but I'm going to learn. I probably should have done this workshop prior, but I get to learn too. So during breaks or whatnot, please take advantage and stroll down. It's opposite end of the building, or if you go upstairs, it's the top of the escalator to the right. And they're hard to find. If you look for the pillar downstairs on the opposite end, it's behind that. We're hiding. Thank you.
Yeah, and so that's our Digital Scholarship Hub, which we're really excited to build up. And so I want to tell you a little bit about the Digital Scholarship Lab at MSU, which is super cool. So our workshop leaders are from Michigan State, and they provide their professional expertise in the Digital Scholarship Lab at MSU. So it opened in February 2018, and it's supported by the University Libraries at MSU and the College of Arts and Letters. And it is a 10,000 square foot space-ish. So it's a really nice big space. It's designed for multidisciplinary use, and it is the first in the United States to have an Igloo Vision visualization cylinder, which provides a shared experience in which multiple people can work together while surrounded by a fully immersive 360-degree projection screen. The lab also features a virtual reality room with VR headsets, instruction space, meeting rooms, offices, a dedicated room for digitization projects, including advanced and graphics-intensive computing software, and informal gathering areas to facilitate cross-disciplinary collaboration. So a really cool space and great inspiration for us as we continue to develop our digital scholarship hub here. So now I want to introduce our expert digital humanities team that's here to lead our workshop for us today from MSU. So we have Kristen Mapes. Kristen is the Assistant Director of Digital Humanities in the College of Arts and Letters at MSU. She's the Academic Advisor for the Digital Humanities Minor and Graduate Certificate. She regularly teaches an introductory course to Digital Humanities and co-created and runs, which I think sounds so fun, the Technology, Humanities, and Arts in London Study Abroad program. Don't we all dream of Study Abroad program? And then we have Megan Kezia. She's a digital scholarship librarian at MSU. In her current role, she works with faculty, students, and librarians on their digital projects, including consulting on metadata and digital preservation issues, course and assignment design, project management, web design, coding and programming, and tool selection. She's the chair of the steering committee for MSU's Institute for Liberal Arts Digital Scholarship and a member of the Michigan Academic Library Association Membership Committee. We have Kate Topham. She's the digital archivist at MSU, where she specializes in metadata, data migration, and digital collections. She currently serves as the archivist on the American Religious Sounds Project, which I just checked out, and it's super cool. And I'm just learning a lot about digital sound studies, and that's just like a really cool area. So I have questions about that at some point. Her previous archival projects include the Michigan Latin Archive, a digital archive of materials on Latin education at Michigan, Kane and Continuity, a digital exhibit showcasing on the sets of Citizen Kane, and Music Time in Africa, visualizations of record data from recordings of the Music Time in Africa radio program. So I'm going to hand it over to these guys. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Oh yeah, so we have, So we have put all of the slides and some materials and are continuing to add some additional resources that might be of use to you all. And they're all at this URL, which I think was sent out to you yesterday, but just as a refresher, here it is. There are also still there's a whole row of computers and chairs over here, so as anyone trickles in, feel free to head over there. So we're going to talk about some digital humanities. We often think that, or I think that it's most readily explained sort of what this digital humanities thing is and what are some of the issues in it and how do we do it through showing some examples. So we're going to point out some different themes and key aspects of a digital humanities project, and in part how you kind of work through a digital humanities project, also by showing a few examples of those things. So that's kind of how we're going to structure ourselves for the getting started today.
So we started with introductions. We're going to move into how DH projects are made. We're leaving a good amount of time for questions and conversation at the end. We imagine you all might have a lot of questions for us, and we could talk for any amount of time probably on these topics, but we want to know what would be most useful to you. And then right at the very end, before we break, we're going to give everyone a reminder overview of what the workshop options are for later today. Okay. So we're going to start by talking about, just in general, like how DH projects are made. And we wanted to, I think, be really upfront by saying this is not, we're going to show you a set of projects as we move through these different steps as illustrative examples of how this has sort of worked out in practice for us. And so this is absolutely not a scientific sampling of projects in any way. This is just a representative slice of projects that the three of us have worked on or are otherwise extremely familiar with. We thought that would also be the most useful to you because we can kind of give you as much detail as you'd like to know about the nitty-gritty of how all of these projects worked out because we were involved with them. So the most important thing, and this probably sounds really obvious to say, but it's surprising how often it trips up even experienced DH researchers, is starting from a research question. It's really easy, especially as we get into the workshops. We're going to show you all some really cool tools. It's very easy to get excited about them. I think it's probably happened to all three of us more than one time. We're like, this is great. And you're like, what am I going to do with this? It's so cool. That is usually not ultimately a super fruitful approach because you inevitably get to a point where you're stuck because approaching from the tool first means your question is usually not as robust as it could be. And you get to a point where you're like, why am I doing this? What am I doing? What's happening here? So starting from a research question and really remembering to keep grounding yourself in what it is that you want to discover is always going to be the better strategy. It's not necessarily the easiest approach. It's easy to want to try out a tool, and that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with experimenting with tools. It just means if you're starting a new project, especially if it's something that is going to be important for your research or for your CV, your promotion and tenure requirements, really grounding in that research question is going to be much more helpful in the long run. The next part is choosing a methodology or methodologies, and then there will be some questions about how technical or how computational you want to go. There's a lot of choices here. None of them are necessarily inherently right or wrong choices. It depends on what's right for your project. Getting the raw materials, this can often actually be a step that takes a really long time. You're all probably familiar with sort of the more traditional research process that you do in your discipline. This step can take a lot longer because they're essentially in some ways going to be moving out probably of your usual frame of reference, your usual areas of comfort. You might need to keep finding information from disciplines where you don't usually find information or different kinds of information. And this can also end up being an iterative process. So that can take a really long time. And then also sometimes you're going to be assembling or creating your information yourself, and that almost always takes a really long time. Especially if you're working with data sets. One thing we're going to talk about, I think as we continue, future or further on in the slides, are thinking about your data as being structured data or unstructured data, what that means. And also whether, like I said, you might assemble your own data set, but whether your information is born digital or whether it's something that you digitized. So if you're digitizing it, you're sort of by definition creating your own data set. If you're using someone else's digitized materials, someone else has started that work for you, but it also usually means you have some orienting to do on what's been done and what exists in that data set. Planning for preservation. A lot of times it's easy to sort of put this kind of at the end, but we as librarians and archivists by training would like to urge you to think about it as soon as possible. There's sort of that joke, like the best time to think about preservation was at the very beginning of your project, and the second best time is right now. It's much, much easier to preserve the work, the hard work that you're doing, both for yourself so you can remember what you did if you're going to do a future iteration of your project, and also, again, for those promotion and tenure requirements, so you can explain to your colleagues what your work is, and then finally so that your work can be potentially used or revisited by other folks. It's easier to do all of that if you've thought about preservation and kind of baked it in from the outset. If you're kind of reverse engineering it at the end, you're going to find out things you wish you had done just so please, as much as possible, think about it at the beginning and do not hesitate to reach out to your librarian colleagues who are delighted when people come to us early. It does sometimes happen. Selecting tools. So there's a lot of tools. We're going to talk with you about a lot of tools, but I think one of the takeaways that we really want you to have from this is that there are a lot of options, but often what is going to be the most useful tool for you is what you will use, what your team will use, and we want you to take into consideration kind of what we call the socio-technical considerations. So like, what are your human resources? For instance, if you are looking to build a website to display your project and your campus does not support the like Ruby and Rails framework, maybe choosing a Rails app is not going to be the way to go. It might be like theoretically the most perfect thing for your project, but if you can't get the support for it, it's going to just be a struggle start to finish to get it to work correctly. And so thinking about those kind of considerations, what support do you have locally? What are your human resources? And start from those and then sort of choose tools that complement the skills of your human resources. And then I sort of alluded to the infrastructural considerations as well. Every campus has its own peculiarities and foibles and things that it supports and things that it doesn't, and resources that are available if you know who to ask. And so think about what your infrastructural supports are. And if you don't know what they are, that's totally fine. If you have like a librarian, if you have a good advocate in your IT department that you can talk to about what exists and what your options are, that person is a huge resource for you and definitely consult them. Last of all, we're going to talk some about making the work public, which there's a lot of stuff that gets tied up in making your work public at the end of the project. So one challenge with digital humanities projects is that they often don't have an end in the same way that something like a manuscript or a painting or another kind of art piece must at some point have an end. You just have to like stop eventually, right? With digital tools, like you don't have to stop necessarily in the same way there's not a hard cutoff. And so that changes the question of what it means when it's done. So you have to make a decision about when to make it public or whether to make it public, sort of independent of the conversation about when it's finished, because finished is kind of, you know, time to be a moving target. There's also questions about like what does making it public mean and what is the best format for publishing your work. work? Is it the internet? Is it a manuscript? Sometimes it is a manuscript. Sometimes it's a data set. There could be a lot of things that come out of your work, conference talks and papers, and they may or may not be like your project as such. So it's just, there's a more complex set of things to think about when you're thinking about publishing your work.
One thing about that I think is also helpful is that it can seem like, okay, there's all these complex things to think about, but it also means that there are some choices as well. So when you think about any of these things, that there's always a variety of choices, and sometimes the digital choice or among the digital choices might be the right thing, and other times it might be that these questions prompt you to think through your research question and your process in ways that then actually steer you to a method that might not be a digital method, or a method or a presentation type or publication type that might not be a digital one, and that's still just as like useful and productive and related. So we don't need to force it either. So the first thing that, as Megan talked about, we're going to orient around is having a research question. And so I'm going to show a couple of examples of projects that kind of are good examples of having a research question. So this first one came from a few years ago in my Introduction to Digital Humanities undergraduate course. I had a student who was a really advanced undergraduate student and had been working in a research lab around digital humanities and literary cognition, and so she was preparing to write her honors thesis on Jane Eyre, and so she wanted to use the final project in my course as a way to sort of begin some of that research that would then feed into and support and help her move toward that honors thesis project. So she was interested in how reading and literacy function in the novel Jane Eyre, so she ended up creating, and I put the URL here, which is janeeyre.wordpress.com, but I will show you a few bits of it. So you can see that she was orienting around this question of how do we understand reading, how do we understand literacy in this one novel. And she had a deep knowledge of this particular work. And what her final project ended up being was a text analysis of the novel Jane Eyre that she then wrote as, it is in a website format, but it's basically just an essay that incorporates text, images, and some data, and then she also has a screencast that explains her methodology and walks you through her spreadsheet and how she got there, and she shares the data set. So this is a public-facing digital product, but fundamentally it could have been written as a paper, right? But it's oriented very strongly in that research question. So it looks like a research essay. I will talk a little bit more, thank you. I will talk a little bit more in depth in the tools part about how she came to the tool selection that she did, but this is here showing simply a screenshot of how she integrated in some of the tools and graphs that were output from her research process into this basically essay that she published on her website. So just showing one example of a project that is coming from an undergraduate context where somebody is really orienting strongly around using a digital methods and a digital presentation type for a research question. The second thing in terms of selecting methodology is that you need to then think around all of these methodologies that you can choose from, which can again be sort of overwhelming potentially. So I mentioned that in Kara's project, the Jane Eyre one, she used text analysis as her approach, and the reason why she did that is because she was working with a novel, right? And so it made lots of sense that that's what she would want to do. But there are other methods, and this is not a complete list either, that you undertake data visualization if you have the right type of data for that. You can undertake network analysis as a methodological approach, image analysis, which can undergo a computational approach or a non-computational approach. Some virtual environment things along the lines of augmented reality or creating virtual reality, creation for the sake of reproduction or recreation or for creative purposes. And you could also use that as a process, through that process of creating VR environments for analysis to understand the era in which you're working or the potential, the possible era in which you're working more deeply. Another method is social media analysis. There's more things that you can do, but just to say that there are lots of different options. And so again, rooting it in the research question that you have is going to lead you to what you really want to explore in terms of the methods that you might take. And you can also combine these as well. So you could start by saying, I know that I want to look at all of the newspapers from 19th century Chicago and do some text analysis to try and get a sense of maybe what's in there, and then that could focus you in on trying to understand potentially things around the geographies of publication and printing, or where crimes were reported in the newspapers, and that might lead you into a mapping approach, which could also then lead you into a network analysis approach. So these things can also string together depending upon the project. So one example of a project that used several different methodologies and explored them, and this is again in a pedagogical context, is this critical comics project. So this was a class that was a digital humanities seminar class, so it was very small. All the students had some introduction to basic methods in digital humanities, but in this course they spent the whole semester, or a large chunk of the semester, working together to take a collection of comic books that the Michigan State University Library of Special Collections holds, and from pre-1923, so that they were out of copyright, and they digitized that small collection of comic books, put them, assigned metadata to them, and put them up into a digital archive, and then also use the library catalog data for those records and the metadata that they had created to create exhibits, and also to do some larger scale visualization and analysis using a couple of different methods. So this was an opportunity for them to take a project from kind of start to finish using both material that they digitized that they created themselves, as Megan alluded to, and material that was already created that they needed to repurpose or encounter to create some new information and some new understandings of pre-1923 comics in our collection. The screen, what I have up here on the screen, was using this image analysis method. So they used a tool called ImagePlot, which was built by Lev Manovich from Software Studies Initiative at CUNY, and was built on top of ImageJ, which is a software that was developed by the NIH in order to study cells. But they use that to basically plot, based on image brightness and hue and saturation, the comics over time. So that's one, they used image analysis, but they also used some other methods, including mapping, to try to understand where these comics were coming from, and also potentially what they were referring to geographically. So this assembly of methods also can sometimes provide, through the accumulation of those encounters, new information.
Okay, so we talked about getting the raw material, and we're going to keep talking about the Critical Comics collection and project really quickly. So what you're seeing here is a little bit of their analysis, a screenshot of one of the web exhibit pages, and this right here is an interface called OpenRefine, which you're going to, I think, hear more about probably later today, or at least one of us at some point. We're all fans. So ImageRefine is a tool. It is OpenRefine. What did I say?
ImageRefine. Yeah, it's all good. I just said image analysis bunch.
Okay. OpenRefine is a tool. It used to be called Google Refine. I'm not sure if Google still runs it.
No, so Google created it, developed it, and then opened it up, and it's open source. So now you can download it, and there's a community of people who use it and continue to keep it up. But the origin of it was in Google, so that's where the origin naming from started.
So OpenRefine is really good for normalizing data. So you'll hear some folks, there's kind of there's a conversation around using the terminology of like cleaning data, because that sort of implies that there was something wrong with the data, and it does tend to also imply a more, I'm going to say, like computer science approach, which is that like data should be neat and normalized, whereas from a humanities perspective, we know that data are messy because humans are messy and our lives are messy, and we do need data to be relatively normalized in order so we can do analysis on it, but we also want to stay aware that there's nothing inherently wrong with data that display real human complexity, and so that's sort of like a tension. So OpenRefine is for normalizing data, especially what's called like fuzzy data. So if you have inconsistencies in your metadata in terms of how people or places are referred to, OpenRefine can kind of search through like a big spreadsheet basically of data and say, hey, I see this and I see this and I think these are maybe the same. Would you like me to make them the same? Which one do you want me to pick? It's a really fantastic tool. And so we ended up having the students do a lot of that work on the catalog data that they exported. So if anybody is familiar with, is anybody familiar with catalog data at all? Okay, give me a couple minutes.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, thank you, yep. So if anybody is familiar with catalog, library catalog data, it comes in a weird format, and it's not really designed for humans to read. It is machine readable by definition. So to the human eye, it kind of looks like garbage unless you know what you're looking at. And so we got the professor for the class talked to some librarians at MSU when he was going to start doing this project and said, I would really like some of the catalog data. How do I get that? And he said, well, we do some stuff on the back end and we can export a file for you in a couple of different file types. So we did some experimenting doing from a file type and what would work for him. And then when we eventually got a file out that was showing the right data that we wanted, it was still kind of a mess when you open it up in Excel. It was hard to read through, and so we had the students go through OpenRefine and do several rounds of normalizing and merging fields and getting it to a place where you could kind of look through a spreadsheet and have any sense of what we were actually looking at and what was in there. So that is often a process that needs to happen, but it's also just to say that it seems like catalog data is a thing that you should be able to get from your library, but sometimes that is actually kind of, it takes a little bit of lift to do. So I would say it's always worth assuming when you're getting a data set that it's gonna be more work than you thought for hashtag reasons, because sometimes like stuff just comes up where you're like, oh, I didn't think that would be difficult. So that's just sort of one thing to be aware of, and that's something that came up in this case. The other set of data that the students worked with was the digitized comics that they worked with. So we had to get them the ability to get into special collections as a group and then individually to make appointments. So that was like a lot of lift from the logistics perspective of getting them all in. We didn't have a very big special collections reading room at that time, so it was hard physically to get them all in there. And then we didn't have a scanner necessarily that would support the level of image quality that they wanted. So we ended up having the students photograph their comic pages that they selected, which is not ideal, which is part of why the Digital Scholarship Lab now has a digitization room in it. Because as we were doing this class, we discovered that we had not really designed our physical infrastructure to do this kind of class and do this kind of work.
I'm just going to insert with a tiny anecdote, which is when we think about the structures that we work in our institutions, like MSU Libraries actually has a very robust digitization suite, but it's all set up for the library doing digitization for projects that might be grant funded or that the library has undertaken because they want to do that, but it wasn't, as Megan said, set up for bringing in students who might be doing the digitization themselves as part of their learning process. And so that was the limitation, is like we had scanners, but they just weren't available for students in this context. And so just to be full disclosure, when we were creating our Digital Scholarship Lab, there was, some political maneuvering around being like, well, we're gonna get some scanners, but it's okay. This isn't gonna take away all of the work and this whole scanning setup over here. This is for, contexts in which faculty are working directly with students or where faculty have their own projects. So just to, share that, because I think sometimes it's helpful to understand also kind of the human relationship structures in which we,
So I came from a small liberal arts background before I was at MSU, and so it was really strange to me that there wasn't a way for students to digitize easily as part of a class. And when it came up, the reaction was like, oh, well, we just send it to DMC and they'll digitize it. I'm like, the students need to do it. And they're like, there was just a lot of like, well, why? Because I need to learn. So yeah, we have a really fantastic in-house digitization team that does great work. If you want to drop off your stuff and then essentially come back and pick it up later, but that's not what we want. We didn't have like an in-between option, so.
So now we're going to talk about digital preservation. And I have Orange Peas over here because Star Wars is about digital preservation. Ask me about that later. But this game is also illustrated because one of the challenges with preserving all or part of your digital humanities project is that it's made up of a lot of different digital pieces. And sometimes one thing gets out of date, like WordPress gets updated and you don't go in and fix everything. So your site kind of breaks a little bit and it looks bad, or other things like that. Software changes and you can't open its file. Remember WordPerfect? Try to open it now.
Okay, so I'm going to jump back in to share a little bit about a project that I helped with, and also we have some quarter sheet handouts that we can pass around after this, but as we have been working through helping with projects directly and also just consulting with people on projects around digital preservation, we've created a quarter sheet front and back that says, here are some things to think about with digital preservation from the beginning. And so we brought some to share with you all, and we have extras if you'd like, so that we can, these are things we've learned over time from failures and maybe some successes. So I worked with a small team in our College of Arts and Letters unit back in 2016, so it's a few years ago now, because some people came from the MSU Sea Grant project, so part of our extension services throughout the state of Michigan, and they wanted to commemorate the 30-year anniversary of this flood that happened in 1986, and there was quite a lot of devastation, and so they wanted to commemorate this flood from 1986 and do two things in doing that. One of those goals was to kind of gather some stories and some images to showcase what had happened and help people remember and people who weren't there know about it, but they also wanted to use this as a prompt to help educate people about how to prepare for future floods. And so this was a project where we knew that it was time-bound because this was specifically for this one period of this year where we were going to be pushing out to the public and wanting to gather information, but knowing that 3 years down the line it wasn't really going to be as big of a thing, but we wanted to keep it, give it as long of a digital life as we could. And so some of the strategies that we took were purchasing, they had some grant money, the group that came to us, so I encouraged them to purchase a domain name for the longest possible period of time up front. So the URL for this project is 1986flood.com, and so they purchased 1986flood.com for 10 years. So at least we know that the URL will work for 10 years. Now, there are different strategies that you could employ. We could have tried to find a URL that might have been under an MSU domain names that potentially we wouldn't have to change it in the long term. But to be honest, one of the goals was to have more of an easy public outreach, and so this URL was easier for the immediate goals of the project, but also I can't really guarantee that the project would have continued to live at the same URL under MSU's domain name, you know. So this was actually the best solution for that. And then when the project was coming to a close, I undertook a couple of things as a way to try to help mitigate some of the digital preservation concerns that I could imagine happening in the future. So I did one thing, which is, and I'll show you this in just a moment, I did a screencast walkthrough of the site as it stood once we basically finished it and we were about to just kind of let it out to pasture. And it doesn't have sound or anything, but because this involved an interactive map, I know that that will break at some point, and so this way they could preserve what it was like to click through on that interactive map. So that was one strategy that I employed. Another one was to make sure all of the pages on the website were individually saved to the Internet Archive. This isn't the most high-tech solution at all. This is a free solution, but I'll show you what that looks like in just a moment. This way, how this pages looked is preserved somewhere that is publicly accessible that people can get to in the future. And then another strategy that we employed is that the Bay City, or the Bay County Historical Archive in here, is serving as the historical repository for this project. So all the photos and audio that we collected through some of our activities is stored with them. And so we also, I downloaded all of the materials, all the digital files, including the database of the WordPress installation, and sent it to them. So they also have a backup of everything that exists. And so the project looks like, this is what it looked like when we started it. So it's a WordPress site, but this is a screen grab of what it looks like now on the Internet Archive. So if you go to archive or web.archive.org and you go 1986flood.com, you can select from several, and the URL is at the bottom of this slide, you can select from several grabs that have occurred in the past, and you can start to kind of navigate the site. By comparison, this is what it looks like, just the landing when we first started. And now, 4 years on, the site is still live, but do I have a picture of it now? I can tell you that there's a kind of black, gray box behind the text, which was enabled to make it so there was enough contrast between the image and the text. It says the Great Flood of 1986. Now, in the updates of WordPress since then, that black box is basically gone, and so it's like white text on a white picture. The site is still working, but it does not look as good as it did 4 years ago. But at least we have this up here, and I know I could go in and update that, but I can't do that right now. I don't have time. I'm here with you. I'm just going to leave this going for just a second. So this is just the screencast that I had created. So you can just see that when we think about preservation, it's not always about saving every single little moment in the exact same way that it was originally created, but it's about saving some of the experience of what there was when the project existed. And we have those images also saved as well individually. So, all right.
Okay. So now I'm going to talk about the American Religious Sounds Project, which Hannah briefly mentioned. It's a very different kind of project than the 1986 flood project because it's a collaboration between Michigan State and Ohio State, and it started 5 years ago with two professors sending students out into the wilds to record religious sound, whatever that means to them. And so we have a lot of different things. We have church music, we have street preachers, we have the sounds of dump trucks at fish fries. We have tarot reading, lots of different things. If you want, the URL is religioussounds.osu.edu if you want to check it out while I'm talking. But because this project has essentially been collecting sound recordings for 5 years, this is a massive, massive collection. And sound files are a difficult a difficult digital object to take care of because you want to maintain as much audio quality as possible, but those files are huge. We are almost all, we are like 75% of the way to a terabyte right now. But also, over that 5-year period, the way that they've collected these files and the information about them has changed. So the way that everything's organized in our archive is different. And we have metadata in Google Sheets. We have metadata in doc files on Box. We have metadata that's like on somebody's hard drive in Ohio where I can't get it. So a lot of the work that I've been doing is collecting all this metadata in one place and resolving the structure so that it's all the same and it's easily relatable back to the original file. So we know when we see this file from 5 years ago, we know what's on it. There's another challenge is that a lot of the metadata, so the description of the files and the recordings themselves were collected by students. We love students. They make a lot of mistakes. So there have been a few times where there have been a lot of typos. There have been times when there were things that were just plain wrong, like language identifications that were incorrect, or students misidentifying the denomination, which is something we really want to get right so that it's respectful. So I've been doing a lot of normalization using OpenRefine to fix those mistakes and get everything right. There was another challenge with managing such a large archive is that we haven't been using a file name convention, and over time things have just had their file name changed, so it no longer matches the original metadata, so we don't know what is on the file anymore. Pretty simple. This is an example of the archive on our website, so you can go and browse as you will. I put this up here to show that we need this metadata. We need to know what's on the file in order for us to publish it to our website and share everything. It also presents another challenge because we make these clips from the website from a field recording that could be hours and hours long. So it's important for us to know which field recording it came from, what's on it, where it was taken. So this is a diagram to illustrate kind of what my entire job has been so far. So we were, the original process of collecting recordings and metadata was that we were collecting those in 2 different places. So files would get uploaded to Box, and the metadata would go into a Google form on Google Drive. And people were not good about keeping the file name consistent when they entered it in the metadata. So it would be, they would drop something into Box, and we would be like, I don't know what this file is. They just put this here. They didn't give us any information about it. And there were other challenges in that there was a project manager who was very, very competent, but she would change file names and move things around. And so now when I come in to try and make all these connections, I don't necessarily know what she did, and she has now gone on to another job, so I don't have her institutional memory. So now I'll talk about our solution for this. So we've actually developed a Ruby on Rails application that streamlines the upload process. So you have to enter metadata when you give us a file, and you're doing it in the exact same place. It's called Aura, the application for uploading religious audio. I'm very happy that I remembered that. It took us a long time to name it, so for a long time it was just the tool. So it all goes into Aura, and that streamlines how we get it into the website, because it automatically generates what metadata we need for the website. And we're also working on a larger preservation effort, which is to ingest all of our materials into the Vincent Voice Library at Michigan State. So that these sound files have a long-term preservation place where they can live and they'll be taken care of even when the American Religious Sounds Project is over. Okay. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about what we have on our preservation checklist postcards. So when you're starting your project, it's important to think about all these questions. So what do you want from preservation? How long do you want your project to live? How long does it need to live? Does it need to live for 100 years? Probably not. But at some point, your project's going to deprecate and it's going to die. It's a sad thought, but it's going to happen. So you want to think about what do you need? Do you need it to be? Do you need it to exist for 5 years? Does it need to exist for 10 years? And the next thing to think about is how do you want to share it with the public? Is it going to be on an archive? Is it going to be on a WordPress site? Is it going to be like a section of your personal blog? Is it going to be a bunch of tweets? Whatever it is. And you have to think about how you're going to share it in order to think about how you're going to preserve it, because all those things I just mentioned have very different preservation considerations. 3, I kind of already covered that, but how long should it be accessible to the public? This is important when considering platforms because you want to pick a platform that is stable. So something like Twitter has been around for a long time, but they can always just take that away from you.
Yeah. If you Storify's gone.
Yeah. Yes.
If you don't know what that is, that's fine too.
Yeah.
People used to use Storify a lot to gather tweets and to tell a story of either a conference or a moment that happened and say, okay, this is now my preservation of this Twitter activity. And then Storify got bought by, I think, Adobe, and Adobe decided to shut it down. And so if you were relying on this very handy thing called Storify to collect tweets as a preservation approach, that worked for a little while, but wasn't a long-term thing. So
Yeah. GitHub is also owned by Microsoft now, so if that's your platform for storing your code, beware.
She says, well, we do put code out there
Oh
too,
yes,
so.
Absolutely. I have to. I love GitHub, but it's something. It's always something to be aware of. So the next thing to think about is what happens if there's a major if your grant money runs out, if your institution no longer supports your project. For example, the American Religious Sounds Project is grant funded, and we have enough to manage. We have enough, I think, for the next 5 years. That's our plan. And then the plan is to hand it off to somebody else so that another religious studies professor can start gathering materials and they can take control of the project. So we have kind of an end of life for our part of the project because we're going to eventually run out of money. So it's important to think ahead. The money isn't going to be there for this project forever. What can I do now? And the last important question is, what do you need from metadata? What do you need to know about your digital objects so that you can keep using them into the future? What kind of structure does it need to be in? Do you need a spreadsheet? You could gather information in a Word doc. Please don't do that one. But
That's better than nothing. It's better than nothing.
it is better than nothing. It is better than nothing. I will say, when I have a file that I don't know anything about and I find a random Word doc that describes it, I'm relieved. But I'm not happy that is how it has continued to exist. So yeah, now we will move on to tools. Okay. So basically, don't just pick a tool because it seems cool. Although I'm going to provide a caveat that selecting, when you encounter something that might be cool and fun, go forth and play with it. Like that, we're not trying to say don't experiment, don't try things out without having a research question already.
You're strictly no fun.
Yeah, no fun. Actually, my family does joke that I hate happiness. So, this tracks. You gotta be consistent. No, but so the idea simply is to say, like, do play, do experiment, do try new things out. Just, of course,
know or think about what's the context for the thing that you're experimenting with. And when you're undertaking a more formal research project or you're helping students and guiding them through doing that themselves, that it's not just driven by, this is cool and I want to make something fit to it. So just to go back to that Jane Eyre example that I talked about at the beginning, so again, as we know, the research question here was really interested in text, analyzing text, and in analyzing text that was one novel, not all of 19th century female British writers' literature, or all of the Chicago newspapers example that I gave earlier, but that it was a kind of bound thing. So that meant that we would want to undertake a text analysis because she was trying to understand how reading is talked about and perceived in this text, not where things happening or who exactly is being mentioned how often. So some other methods wouldn't be appropriate for that particular project. But also because we have one text and not 200 or 1,000 texts, a text analysis, a computational text analysis approach such as topic modeling would not be appropriate either. So we land with text analysis as our method, right? And then we think about what would be an appropriate tool for her to use. And so because she didn't quite need a super level of computational things, and she really could start with word counts, and also was not someone who has a lot of programming experience, using the tool Voyant was a straightforward answer for her because it allowed her to get started quickly and to explore and experiment and then take out some of the results that she gained into a spreadsheet format and continue to work with them further. So when we were thinking about tools, we thought text analysis, and then we thought, okay, Voyant is a good place for her to start. Additionally, in terms of the tools that she used for that project, Voyant was the tool that she used for her text analysis, research component, but then in terms of presenting the project, she wanted to make it a public site so that she could share her research, and so she needed to make a website. And at the time, we did not have access to domain of one's own, which I know you all are just getting, but which we now have. And so in order to set her up with kind of a server space where she can install something herself, wasn't really available to us or really old hat to us yet at that point. And she wanted to have something that was free. So she set up a website using WordPress.com because it was something that would be free that she could do without needing to program anything. There are some downsides to that as well, but that's what she chose. So that was some of the decision making around the tool selection on that front. And then the last sort of tool that she used, other than Excel for some things, is that she created a screencast where she talked through how she had collected her data and how she had prepared her spreadsheet, or how she put things into Voyant, and then how she exported them from Voyant, and then how she prepared a spreadsheet to create some charts and those sorts of things. And so in order to do that screencast, she used the tool Screencast-O-Matic, which was free and allowed her to export and upload that screencast to YouTube, which allowed her to then embed that that video into her website. So as we think about tools, we can think about the things that go into the main, read the methodology part of the project, but it can also be, if you're wanting to present the project publicly or do some of these other things, there's all these other decisions that you need to make as well. So just a quick screen image of what she had created when she used Voyant as a text analysis tool. This is a screenshot of what she found when she input Jane Eyre into Voyant. If you want to learn more about Voyant, I'll be talking about it and we'll be experimenting with it during the pedagogy workshop. And here's an image of one of the tools within Voyant where they were creating a network of words that were being used throughout that text, which allowed her to understand more about how reading, and physiognomy, which were her main areas of interest in terms of analyzing specific word pairings, how that looked. And additionally, she used it at this other kind of part of Voyant where this is called context or keywords in context, where in the center, you can see one word, and then on each side, you can see all of the 5 words to the right or the left of that word, so you can compile all the instances, in this case, of the word read, to see the context for when the word read is occurring. She was able to then export that as a spreadsheet and create this accessible graph, which I'm so proud of her. She made an accessible graph, which means that there's not just color differences in the lines, but that there's pattern as well, and was then able to understand something about read and reading and physiognomy over the course of the novel. And I'm not going to play this, but this was her screencast. And then secondly, just returning to the 1986 flood project to get one more example. So this was, again, as you know,